Welcome to the Middle East Initiative's Inside the Middle East Q&A. I'm Jennifer Quigley-Jones, an editor with the Journal for Middle Eastern Politics and Policy. And today I'm joined by Peter Maurer, who was elected President of the International Committee of the Red Cross in 2012. Prior to this, he had a long and distinguished career with the Swiss Diplomatic Service and was the first permanent representative of Switzerland to the United Nations. Peter, could you answer what have been the biggest hurdles to the ICRC providing humanitarian assistance in the Syria crisis, and what makes this crisis different?
There are many hurdles at the present moment with which we are dealing and looking at providing access into besieged and opposition-controlled areas in Syria. First, the government of Syria is very reluctant to offer humanitarian assistance in those areas which are not under its own control. Secondly, again, the government is very reluctant to accept the definition of humanitarian that we normally have and uses much more restrictive concepts of humanitarian. Medical assistance, for instance, is considered more of a strategic support of populations and fighters in besieged and opposition-controlled areas. So we have difficulties on the side of the Syrian government. But we have also difficulties on the side of the opposition because the opposition is so split. And different parts and pieces of Syria are under control of different groups and groupings, which are difficult to identify, and then also difficult to negotiate once we have been able to get beyond government-controlled areas. So cross-frontline humanitarian assistance has been difficult. It has been a war which has been fought with, in this respect, of international humanitarian law by both sides. And it's difficult to engage with both sides in terms of respect of conduct of hostility provisions of the Geneva Conventions. It has been difficult to reach the chain of command of military operations in Syria in order to sensitize them on the necessity of precaution, distinction and proportionality, and the same on the side of the opposition. Weapons have been used in this context which are either illegal or their use is illegal in densely populated areas like barrel bombs that we see being used increasingly. So it's a particularly cruel conflict in the way it is fought, and it is a particularly difficult conflict in terms of negotiating a neutral and impartial humanitarian space.
This leads on to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2139 quite wonderfully, actually. Do you feel as though it's failed? And as a consistent presence on the ground, like where, how and why do you feel it's failed? Have you seen access change or increase afterwards?
I have no problem with any words and concepts used by UN Security Council Resolution 2139. I think it reflects the broad consensus of the international community of what the best practice would be. The problem is that there is no implementation that is followed and no diplomacy which would support concrete implementation of these resolutions. UN Security Council resolutions do not put themselves into place because they are well formulated. They put themselves into place because you can engage on the basis of those concepts with the parties of the conflict and try to operationalize what is the content of UN Security Council resolution. And obviously this is the missing link between the resolution, which has fine concepts, and the realities on the ground, which are that people in Syria do not get the assistance they need and they deserve.
Do you think this might partly be because so much aid has been politicized and the ICRC is trying to occupy this shrinking space of neutrality as a core value? And how do you feel that's challenged by the politicization of humanitarian assistance?
Well, indeed, we are worried by the fact that increasingly political bodies like the UN Security Council and other international fora are taking on their agenda humanitarian issues and instrumentalize humanitarian issues in order to achieve other than humanitarian goals. This, by definition, is politicizing humanitarian action. So access as a part of a Security Council resolution, as a general concept, it's good when the Security Council is pronouncing itself for easy access for humanitarian workers. In a specific case like Syria, it is adding to the politicization of a concept and is on the other end of the equation putting humanitarian actors under the suspicion that whenever they ask for access, they do it for other reasons than humanitarian. So we do have serious perception problems in a conflict like Syria, where almost each and every access or a humanitarian activity has been part of either a negotiation trying to find a political solution or of a Security Council decision. So we have advocated for a clearer distinction between a political engagement for a non-political humanitarian space, for a neutral and impartial space, to the opposite of bringing all the humanitarian issues, from the conduct of hostilities to the use of weapons to access, as integral part of a Security Council resolution. But this is the reality with which we are dealing, and this reality does not prevent ICRC to do its best to negotiate with all parties to the conflict as big a humanitarian space as ever possible. We have to recognize that this space is not sufficiently big.
So do you see the ICRC as a potential alternative to politicized humanitarian solutions?
We always understand ourselves as advocate for neutral and impartial humanitarian action, and we try to sensitize and to engage through our humanitarian diplomacy members of the international community, to sensitize them about the dangers of mixing agendas and trying to instrumentalize humanitarian objectives in order to achieve political or strategic advantages.
So what, short of a political solution to the Syrian political crisis, do you think could be done to address the humanitarian grievances?
Well, Jenny, this is maybe an opportunity also to be clear that as humanitarian actors, we are more than conscious that we are not bringing a solution to the Syrian problem. The solution to the political problem in Syria has to be found at the political level. But as humanitarians, we try to bring assistance and protection to Syrians. And what we try to do is, again, to negotiate a space in which this is possible. We try to engage with all actors having influence in the theaters of operations, and we try to focus on practical progress on key areas in Syria which are particularly in need, on key issues which are of particular concern, like healthcare delivery, and to enlarge the space through confidence building and negotiations with the parties to the conflict.
And finally, and more personally, you assumed the presidency at a very turbulent time. And what do you feel your previous career brought to your presidency? What skills do you have that help lead the ICRC now? And has it been more challenging than you anticipated?
Well, it's certainly not a disadvantage that I have passed a lot of time in my life negotiating in the international arena, because negotiations, be they in defense of interest of a country, what I have done before becoming ICRC president, or for humanitarian objectives, in terms of the skills and mechanics have certainly similarities. Indeed, the challenges are numerous. There is a general impression of accelerating conflicts and expanding conflicts theaters, be it in Syria and the region, be it in other parts of the world, and therefore the management skills and crisis management skills that I hope I have acquired also in my previous functions come handy to deal with situations like this one. But we have to be modest. I think the best skills do not suffice at the present moment to deal with some of the complexities. We need more investment in our professional development, in trying to build capacities in order to respond. And this is a huge task given the depth and breadth of the crisis in which we are looking.
Thank you so much for your time. If you want to read more about the ICRC's work, you can go to icrc.org. And if you want to keep up to date with events around Harvard on the Middle East, check out the Middle East Initiative's website. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.